king. We have perhaps 3 or 4 prophets like this. The likes of Nabi Yusuf, we know, and Prophet Sulaiman. He was a king, whilst at the same time having the office of being a prophet. Now, verses 12 explains here, and I paraphrase, how the jinns used to work for him. In the sense that he had a vast kingdom. Jinns were working throughout for him. So they would build castles and cooking furniture and many other things. As you know, the example with the Queen of Sheba, and Sulaiman ﷺ asked, who can bring me her throne? This throne was not an ordinary throne. It stretched, according to traditions, for some kilometers. And the jinn said, I'll bring it to you before this time, and so on and so forth. So we know the jinn worked for Sulaiman ﷺ. His kingdom was very vast. But my concern here, or my focus here, is this. Verse 14 of Surah Sabha, where it states, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that we made Sulaiman die. He expired whilst he was at what? On his staff. Now there are many reasons for this. One of which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hikmah, his wisdom. The other is this, and that verse towards the end paraphrases this, that the jinn realized once the staff Prophet Sulaiman died upon it, they thought he was still alive. So when a termite, according to traditions, began eating the wood of Sulaiman's staff, the staff broke and Sulaiman collapsed dead. It was at that point they realized that Sulaiman has been dead. And so they were very arrogant because they thought we had ilmul ghaib. When they realized Sulaiman has now died, they realized, how long was he dead for on that stick of his, on his staff? And so it humbled them in this respect. But the main point is this, even further. When Sulaiman is about to die, he's in his throne. He's upon his throne, in his kingdom, in his palace. Very majestic setting. He sees a shadow walking through. So you can picture it in your mind. Sulaiman is on his throne. Some jinns are working over here. Some jinns in that area. But a shadow begins walking through. He commands it, stop. I am King Sulaiman. Don't you know? You need to ask permission at my door before you enter. This being replied, I don't need your permission. You may be the king of kings, but I don't need your permission. So who are you? How dare you enter my kingdom like this? He replied, I am the angel of death. And so it was at that point he took the soul of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. Now if we fast forward this now, we mentioned there are 2 special doors to Sayyidah Fatima's home. One was external, one was internal. What was the internal one? The internal one was this. When all of the other doors to Masjid al-Nabawi, the internal doors, were closed, this door of Fatima, this door of Ali, let me rephrase it, this door of the Ahlul Bayt was the only one kept open. Why? People complained, Ya Rasulullah, we are from your companions, we are from your friends, we've been with you to the battles. Why have you closed our doors but left open the door of Fatima, the door of Ali and Hassan and Hussein? Rasulullah replied, because when you wake up and you leave your houses, you sometimes are not in the state of purity. These 5 are always pure. These we find in the Holy Quran, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. اللَّهُمَّ صَلِّ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ. This was the internal door. What about the external door of Sayyidah Fatima? That same angel of death who said, I don't need to ask your permission, Sulaiman. I can come through your kingdom when I want. Let's see what happens at the door of Sayyidah Fatima. It's the final moments of Rasulullah. He has his head in the holy lap of Sayyidah Fatima. Bibi Fatima is crying. There's a knock on the door. Emphasis, there's a knock on the door. Sayyidah Fatima says, you have no permission. Go away. The knock happens again. Sayyidah Fatima says once more, go away. We are in a state of mourning. And this happens the 3rd time. Bibi Fatima begins to cry. Her holy tears hit the face of Rasulullah, who wakes up and says, oh Sayyidah Fatima, do you know who this is that's knocking on the door? She said, no, my dear father. The reply came, oh Fatima, the being knocking on your door waits for no one. He is only waiting at your door because of you, because of your position, O Sayyidah Fatima. This is the angel of death. So just analyzing Sayyidah Fatima's door, let alone her character, her essence, her high position, just her door has such a profound meaning that the angel of death, who waits for no one, waits at the door of Sayyidah Fatima. So as we finish, we remember some of the tragedy that occurred upon that very door, where the angel of death stops and asks for permission. The Muslims of the time came with their fire and placed it at that same doorstep, at that same door where Rasulullah would stand and recite the Holy Quran. And so we remember the words of the late great Sheikh Abdul Zahra al-Ka'bi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless his soul. From the houses of Karbala, he was a sincere khatib. He would recite majalis in the haram of Imam Hussein. His majlises were so prominent that even today, the maqtal used on the day of Ashura is Sheikh Abdul Zahra's. He says, one night I had a dream in which I saw the likes of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And they said to me, oh Sheikh, why don't you recite our Musibah? He said, Yabna Rasulullah, I recite your Musibah every day in the haram of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. They said, Sheikh, this is not our Musibah. What would we say to Imam Hassan and Hussein? Oh Imam Hassan, isn't your Musibah this, that when your janazah left your house, it was the only janazah to come back, engrossed with your own blood through the arrows that the enemies had shot at you? Imam Hassan would say, this is not my only Musibah. Oh Imam Hassan, your son Qasim, he left the Khaymaga in one piece, but he came back in pieces. This was your beloved Qasim. Is this not your Musibah? Imam Hassan would say, this was not my only Musibah. Oh Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan's body had the arrows within him. Your body was upon the arrows on the plains of Karbala. Is this not your Musibah? Imam Hussein would say, this is not my only Musibah. They broke one rib of Sayyidah Fatima. They broke all of your ribs, Ya Hussein. Is this not your Musibah? Imam Hussein would say, this is not my only Musibah. Sheikh Abdul Zahra said, oh sons of Rasulullah, then tell me what is your Musibah? I will recite it. They said, oh Sheikh, this is our Musibah. There was a door in Medina, and that was the door of our mother Fatima. And those men came with their fire, and they placed it at that very door. And then they began pushing that door onto our mother Fatima, who then collapsed to the ground, and she was crying, oh Fidda, come and help me. By Allah, they've killed my Mohsin. And then they began taking our father, Imam Ali, outside. So me, Hassan and Hussein, we began looking at each other. Should we go outside after our father, or should we stay inside of our house, watching our mother bleed in front of us? I would say, Ya Imam Hassan Hussein, you saw this Musibah in Medina, but there was your sister Zainab watching as well. And this was not the only fire she saw. There's one fire in Medina today. There were many more in the Khaymagas in Karbala. She saw the fires in Karbala, but that was not the only Musibah she saw. You saw your mother being beaten in front of you. Zainab saw the children being beaten in front of their mothers. Here is Ali ibn Abi Talib being dragged out. In the bazaars of Kufa and Sham, it was Ali ibn Hussein as he was crying, oh people, I am from the Holy Prophet's family, have you no mercy? I am from the Holy Prophet's family, have you no mercy? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the right of Sayyidah Fatima, to accept our humble offering, to forgive us our sins, and to allow us to be with Sayyidah Fatima in this world and the hereafter. For the love of Sayyidah Fatima, if we can have a loud salawat.
MashaAllah, we are blessed to have our homegrown reciter in the form of Sayyid Zuriyab. He is a source of inspiration for the youth from our community. Thank you very much. As I've told you that these majalis are going live on YouTube and Ahlul Bayt TV as well. Before I invite Brother Asad to the stage, I'll just remind all of you that construction work is still going on for this Imam Barga, and your generous contribution is very welcome. And Dr. Sahib is here, Dr. Abbas, and there's a QR code on the Sakina Trust WhatsApp group. You can donate whatever you like, and this will be used in the construction work and all these majalis and everything. Today, we are very blessed to have two eminent scholars with us, Hujjatul Islam al-Muslimin, Sayyid Mahdi Mudarresi, and Maulana Sayyid Muhammad Absar Ali Naqvi. First, Hujjatul Islam al-Muslimin, Sayyid Mahdi Mudarresi will recite, and afterwards, Sayyid Muhammad Ali Naqvi, Absar Ali Naqvi will recite. And today, tomorrow, and day after, there's a series of majalis in this Imam Barga. So I'll request all of you to come for all these 3 days. Now I'll invite Brother Asad to come on the stage and invite.
صلوات محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great honor to welcome Sayyid Mahdi Al-Modarresi to Sakina Trust. This is his first time that he is reciting here. Sayyid Mahdi is a faith leader, lecturer and theologian. He has published many books and articles. Sayyid Mahdi has lectured at various universities around the world, including some of the Russell Group universities such as UCL, King's College, Imperial, London, and SOAS. It's an absolute pleasure to have a world-renowned scholar reciting at Sakina Trust today and for the next 2 nights. Please now welcome to the stage with a very loud salawat, Sayyid Mahdi Al-Modarresi. Allah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. For the hastening of the reappearance of the Master, the Savior, the Avenger, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, recite aloud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It's easy for us to get together, assemble around one another, and praise the household of purity and infallibility. It's easy for us to speak of the merits and virtues of God's most noble, most pure, most pristine creations. When I do that, and when other speakers and scholars and reciters and poets when they speak of the virtues of the household of Rasulullah, everyone rejoices. People say, طَيَّبَ اللَّهُ أَنفَاسَكُمْ. May God bless you. May God give you the backing to continue to serve the cause of the Ahlul Bayt. In other words, the price we pay for standing with the truth isn't a very dear price. It doesn't cost us much to speak of their merits and to sing their praises. But there are times when the cost is extremely high. And it's usually at those times that most people retreat. Most of us aren't willing to pay the price. We're not willing to put our lives, our interests at stake so that we could stand by the truth. One hadith speaks about the importance of enjoining the good and forbidding evil. This most important of divine obligations, according to this very same hadith by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala. He says that this obligation is the single most important of all divine injunctions. Why? He says, because it is through enjoining the good and forbidding evil that you are able to uphold prayer and fasting and hajj, and you're able to prevent evil and sin and transgression. In that same hadith, the Imam says that most people would never enjoin the good or forbid evil unless they could guarantee that their interests were protected. And if they feel that they might suffer financially, perhaps socially, in terms of their status, if they felt threatened in any way, they wouldn't enjoin the good or forbid evil. They'd simply stand on a tall hill, observe what is happening, and make up all manner of excuses and justifications for themselves. The time isn't right. We shouldn't say that. We can't be aggressive. People are already abandoning religion. Entire volumes of justifications and excuses can be made and have indeed been made so that we do not fulfill these two incredibly important obligations. And so, this is the case with most people. But then again, you come across towering giants, people who did not for a second consider their own personal interests. They stood with the truth no matter what. They did what they were obligated to do no matter the cost. Consider this. Think about this example. A man who is regarded as one of the foremost ideologues for Al-Qaeda wrote a book. The title of the book is, in English, Management of Savagery. إدارة التوحش. This book was released on the internet and published back in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. Abu Bakr Jihad, Abu Bakr al-Mujahid, or something along those lines. But the title of the book is إدارة التوحش, Managing Savagery. This book became one of the most important texts for Al-Qaeda and a guiding principle for its operations worldwide. It became its playbook. In it, the author, who is most probably using a pseudonym, says that savagery should be used as a principal component of our methodology. He stresses and emphasizes the importance of using extreme violence. For example, there might be a building that Al-Qaeda operatives are trying to capture. This building could be a post office, it could be a train station, it could be a small police station in a remote village or something along those lines. And it may require 20 armed individuals to take over it. And while it only requires 20 militants, he says that we should use 200 militants to do it. Not because we need the added firepower, but because we're trying to use fear as a weapon of war. News of the takeover of this building by 200 armed militants who kill everyone and everything that stands in their way should spread far and wide, he says. He says people should be terrified. They should be terrorized. They should have fear instilled into their hearts. And the way you do that is, he says, you need to make a distinction between Islam and Jihad. He says Islam is usually something you associate with compassion. You associate Islam with logical, rational argumentation, polemical debates. It's about matters of belief. It's about introducing people to the religion of God. He says, forget all of that. Let's focus on what jihad is in his view. And that is about terrorizing the masses. It's about making governments and entire military units run for their lives. Why am I saying all of this? The management of savagery is an idea, a theory that has been put in place for a very long time. Let me give you an example from ancient history. In the formative years after the death of the Holy Messenger of God, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Some of the tribes refused to pay their taxes to the newly self-proclaimed Khalif. Now, at most, this would be considered a sin. It's like if someone doesn't pray or fast. In this case, they're not paying taxes. Now, legally speaking, religiously speaking, if someone commits a sin like this, are they considered kafir? In the Kharijite mindset, yes. This is very much a Kharijite mentality, that if someone willingly and deliberately refuses to fulfill one of God's obligations, then this person is automatically labeled as a kafir. But where does this idea stem from to begin with? Where did this come from? That a person who commits one sin, they are rendered kafir. Well, it stems from this. These people said that we're not going to pay the Islamic alms, the taxes, either because they were too stingy. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. They didn't wish to pay because now they felt safe with the Holy Messenger of God having passed from this world, the central authority with the Holy Prophet being removed from it isn't as strong. So you know what? I want to keep my money. Tax evasion, or more realistically, the stated reason for their refusal to pay those taxes was that they simply did not recognize the legitimacy of the government. I don't see you as my ruler. I have not given you my pledge of allegiance. I will only pay my taxes to the legitimate successor of Rasulullah, the person who stood there hand in hand with the Holy Prophet. Man kuntu mawlah fa'aliyun mawlah. Everyone saw that. Over 100,000 witnesses. So we're not going to pay taxes. There's a book by a very early scholar, Sunni theologian, historian, collector of hadith, called Al-Habbar. The author of the book, Al-Baghdadi, died in the year 245. So pretty early indeed, right? In that book, he actually stipulates this. He says that when these tribes refused to pay their taxes, the declaration was that these are hurubur ridda. In other words, these people are all murtad, they're a bunch of apostates. And the ruling for an apostate, according to them, was that they must be executed. But that wasn't enough. He says that Khalid ibn al-Walid was dispatched, the foremost government henchman was sent in order to manage savagery. It wasn't just about executing someone who had dissented. It wasn't about simply a matter of creating a sense of order or justice. It was about striking fear into the hearts of anyone who dared question the legitimacy of this government. What did they do? They went, they killed all the men. They then raped all the women that very same night. Imagine grieving women who are in a state of grief for their husbands. And not only that, but he says that the Khalifa declared all of the women as awahir. I apologize for the use of these terms. They were all prostitutes. They have no sanctity. In Islam, if you say this about one woman and you have no proof, you can't back it up, you get 80 lashes. Imagine saying this about an entire tribe, an entire city, people who were Muslim, people whose minarets would echo the sound of the adhan, people who prayed, women who wore hijab. He said they are all awahir. They're all fair game. Do what you will. Then he فَأَمَرَ أَن تُقْطَعَ أَيْدِيهِمْ مِنَ الْمِرْفَقِ. Their hands have to be amputated. This is one example. The other example is from Sahih al-Bukhari. In Bukhari, there's a long chapter called Babu Rajmil Habla min az-Zina, the chapter on stoning a pregnant woman who became pregnant as a result of adultery. Never mind the twisted nature of this topic, but the actual chapter in Sahih Bukhari contains clues and evident facts that prove that this government was never legitimate to begin with. But I just want to draw your attention to just one portion of it. The second Khalifa is the main character, and the hadith is narrated from him. He says that we got together in Saqifat Bani Sa'ida. In the Saqifa, there were 3 of us from the Muhajirin. The Aws and Khazraj were also there, represented by their leaders and some of the people around them, some of their children perhaps, right? Sa'd ibn Ubadah was the chief of his tribe, so he was also there. The dispute erupted as to who the next Khalifa should be. Sa'd ibn Ubadah was a strong candidate because he had the numbers to back it up. He had the votes, he had the constituents, he had his tribe. He was among the Ansar of Medina, so this was his city, this was his backyard. And so he had some very strong chances of being chosen as the Khalifa. However, the circumstances led ultimately to someone else becoming the Khalifa. The second person says that as we were leaving the Saqifa, listen carefully to this, as we're about to leave, there's a bit of a stampede. There was chaos and pandemonium. The entrance and the exit must have been quite narrow. So some people fell. One of those who fell was Sa'd ibn Ubadah. So people started to step over his head. So someone screamed, again, this is all in Sahih Bukhari, قتلتم سعد بن عبادة. You've killed the man. Omar says, I said, قتل الله سعد بن عبادة. May God kill him. Here's a quick question. Whatever happened to respecting the companions of the Prophet? Whatever happened to putting them on a pedestal? Whatever happened to considering these companions as being udul, they're all righteous, they're all good? Whatever happened to the fact that if anyone so much as insults a companion, he or she is to be executed and punished in the worst possible way? Wasn't Sa'd ibn Ubadah among the companions and the top tier companions, no less? Wasn't Sa'd ibn Ubadah among the Ansar that the Holy Quran speaks about? Whatever happened to all of that? قتل الله Sa'd ibn Ubadah. And in fact, they did kill him. They killed him and they blamed the jinn. نحن قتلنا سيد الخزرج سعد بن عبادة فرميناه بسهمين فلم نخطئ فؤاده. An inscription was found on the wall that we killed him. Who's we? Some spirits came and they killed him. Why was he killed? Because you dare defy me? You dare create a dissenting voice? You dare challenge my authority? You dare refuse to pledge your allegiance to me? You're as good as dead. You're wasted blood. دمك مهدور. Management of savagery. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this with these two examples is this. If someone doesn't pay taxes, he gets killed and branded a heretic and an apostate, his wife gets raped. If someone says, I'm not going to pledge my allegiance, I'm not going to fight you, but I just won't recognize you, he's as good as dead and he gets killed. What happens when someone stands before these very tyrants and says to them, أَفَحُكْمَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ تَبْغُونَ? Are you trying to restore the Jahiliyyah, the era of paganism, the era of worshipping idols? What happens when this person completely unmasks and disrobes the sheer hypocrisy of these despots and tyrants? What happens when this person does this, not using her speech by giving a sermon, one in the masjid, another to the women, by going door to door for 40 days, knocking on those doors saying, do you not know who I am? Do you not know who my husband is? Weren't you one of the people who pledged allegiance to Amirul Mu'mineen? Door to door. Not just by doing that, but in fact, by her refusal to allow them to attend her funeral, by her burial at night, by the concealment of her grave. Everything about Fatima alayha salatu wassalam screamed, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Every step she took, every word she uttered, every gesture, everything about her screamed that this authority is illegitimate. Not only is it illegitimate, but they have usurped the rightful successor and heir to the Holy Prophet, that they have stolen what is in their possession, that in fact their agenda isn't just to become kings and rulers and enjoy the splendors of this world, but rather to restore the Jahiliyyah, to restore paganism, to restore what was destroyed by the Holy Prophet with the wrist of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Everything that Fatima did was a clear declaration of all of that. My question is, what do you think they would do to someone like that? Again, I'm not even looking at the details of the historical narrative. I'm not even trying to look up references from their books or our books about what they did, the ambush, the attack, Was it just one attack? Was it 3 separate attacks? Did they burn the door down, or did they simply crush her between the wall and the door? I'm not even going there. I'm just saying, let's be reasonable, rational, logical about this. Given their track record, given their history, given what they did to other people, and to anyone who dared dissent and refuse to give them an oath of allegiance, what do you think they would do to Fatima? Is it then a surprise that they would do what they did? Is it? She stood there and she used verses of the Holy Quran in her famous sermon, which my advice to my dear brothers and sisters, especially those younger members of the audience, is read the Fadakiyah sermon. Don't be content with listening to a lecture. Don't be content with hearing bits and pieces of this sermon from here and there. Actually take some time out. Might take you half an hour, maybe with a little contemplation, a full hour. Take that time out and read through it. Notice what Fatima is telling them. Fatima is saying that whatever mishmash of a pagan religion you are presenting isn't Islam. Fatima is telling them that the creed of Islam isn't what you proclaim it to be, but what I am telling you in this sermon. That the articles of faith are these. That the obligations of Islam serve this purpose. That it was my father and the struggle of my cousin, as she calls him, Ibn Ammi, Ali ibn Abi Talib, that led you to where you are today, having been the scum of the earth, the scourge of humanity. You are here today, having achieved a sense of civility thanks to my father. He gives them a lesson in history. He gives them a lesson in theology. He cites verses of the Holy Quran which are clear condemnations of their actions. يَا ابْنَ أَبِي قُحَافَةَ أَفِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ أَن تَرِثَ أَبَاكَ وَلَا أَرِثَ أَبِي. Is it in the book of God that you can inherit your father, but I can't? Is there a verse in the Quran that says everyone is allowed to enjoy the fact that they can inherit their parents, except the Prophet of God, except his daughter? Or are you saying that I am not a Muslim? What exactly is this? You're citing a fabricated, concocted, manufactured fake hadith to me, which goes contrary to the Holy Quran. The Quran which says that Zakaria asked Allah to give him a child, لِيَرِثَنِي وَيَرِثَ مِنْ آلِ يَعْقُوبَ. The Quran that says, وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ. All these prophets are specifically mentioned as having left an inheritance. And you're saying that I'm the only exception to all of this? Is there a verse in the Quran that says that? Notice one thing. Notice how he cites a hadith that's concocted, obviously fake, obviously manufactured. It goes against the most clear verses of the Holy Quran. Fatima is using Quranic evidence to rebut him, to refute him, right? And this is despite the fact that it was him and his cohort that said, Hasbuna kitabullah. We don't need the hadith. We don't need the instructions of the Holy Prophet. The book of God is sufficient for us. Inna rajula la yahjur. Wasn't it you? Wasn't it your cohort who said that in the presence of the Holy Messenger of God? Well, I'm using verses from the Holy Quran. Fatima Zahra makes this case. He cites verses. She presents arguments that completely disrobe him, completely destroy him. The point I'm trying to make is this, my dear brothers and sisters, is that when the going gets tough, when the price becomes too dear, when it's difficult to make a stance, most of us, and I'm talking about people like myself, would run away. But the reality is that we have been given the example of Fatima, the example of the Ahlul Bayt, to teach us that we must make a stand for the truth no matter what. And that in doing so, and in supporting the cause of the Ahlul Bayt, didn't the Holy Prophet say, Allahumma ansur man nasarah wa khudul man khadala? If you support the Ahlul Bayt, if you stand by them, God will also support you. It's the prayer of the Messenger of God. And those who were successful in defending the cause of the Ahlul Bayt, those who took those stands and paid the price, they are truly the ones who are honored. They're the ones who are raised to the loftiest of positions. I want to share one example with you tonight because I feel that this particular individual is tragically, sadly, underappreciated by us, obviously. In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has an incredibly mind-bendingly lofty position. But we need to be inspired by our leaders, by our scholars, by those who struggled in this way, those who paid the price. This individual is a man by the name, and by the way, he's from the Indian subcontinent. And yet most of the people that I encounter, they've never heard his name. His name is Sayyid Mir Hamid Hussain Naqawi Laknahawi, scholar from the city of Lucknow. Suffice to say that this individual was so incredibly productive and did things that are unmatched, that the likes of Agha Buzurg al-Tahrani, who is one of the most highly regarded biographers and bibliographers of the Shia faith, says in his book, when he discusses the work of Mir Hamid Hussain Laknahawi, he says that his book, Abaqatul Anwar, remember this name, the title of this book, we'll get back to it. He says that Abaqatul Anwar is a book of theology, the like of which has not been written since the advent of the occultation of the 12th Imam. There's nothing like this has been authored. In its strength, the strength of his arguments, as well as its breadth. Let me give you some facts about this book so that you begin to develop an appreciation for these giants and defenders of the Ahlul Bayt. There's a man by the name of Abdul Aziz Dihlawi. He realizes that the Shia faith is beginning to plant its roots in certain regions in India. And so, because of that, he sets out to debunk the arguments of the Shia as he believes. So what he does is he writes a book called At-Tuhfa al-Ithna Ashariyya. This is a tuhfa, meaning it's a gift to the Ithna Asharis, to the Shia. In that book, he says that all of the arguments of the Shia faith are based on and predicated on just 6 verses of the Holy Quran and 12 prophetic hadiths. That's all they have. This idea where you trivialize your opponent, imagining that the opponent is small does not make the opponent small. Trivializing and mockery does not further your case, does it? He says all you have is 6 verses. Ayatul Tathir, Ayatul Wilaya, and you've got 12 hadiths from the Holy Prophet, Hadith al-Thaqalain, Hadith al-Ghadir, these famous hadiths. However, none of these, not the verses nor the hadiths, are interpreted accurately by the Shia. He says that they in fact misunderstand these verses and these narrations. And then he sets out to explain. For instance, he says that Hadithophobia, in which the Holy Messenger of God says, مثل أهل بيتي فيكم كسفينة نوح من ركبها نجا ومن تخلف عنها غرق وهوى. The example of my progeny is like the ark of Nuh. Whoever boards it finds salvation. Whoever fails to board it drowns and perishes. Famous hadith, right? He says that the chain of this hadith is very weak. It's not authentic. There's a concept that I've coined, hadithophobia. This idea that whenever you feel uncomfortable about a hadith, simply dismiss it as being not authentic. Question the authenticity of the hadith and throw it to the curb. It's a method that we've seen over and over again. And nowadays, you have a bunch of children, amateurs, with absolutely no knowledge of hadith or Quran or jurisprudence or history or the biography of the narrators of hadith or anything for that matter. Some coder sitting somewhere, gamers and YouTubers and whatnot, suddenly feel like they're entitled to an opinion on these matters and provide their ideas, their brain barfs, as though they're supposed to somehow split the atom. So this hadith is not authentic, unfortunately. Yes, we do find it in some weak sources, but it doesn't really help their cause. What does Mir Hamid Hussein Naqawi Laknahawi do? The first thing he does, I'll get back to the hadith of Sakina. The first thing he does, and this is about 150 years ago, by the way. This is way before the age of the internet. This is way before you had libraries and catalogs and you were able to just go and look up what you want easily. Even though he never studied outside of India, those from the Indian subcontinent should be proud of the fact that you had giants. You had an Islamic seminary that produced the most astute scholars. Be proud of that and try and reconnect with those roots. Not pride for pride's sake. Try and reproduce what they did. This incredible scholar never studied in Najaf, never studied in Qom, never studied in Isfahan, never studied in Jabal Amil, never studied in Karbala. He was a product of his local seminary, studied mostly under his father. So, at a time when there were no resources, there was almost nothing, he traveled the entire region. And the first thing he discovered was this, that there is another book that was published in Afghanistan and that Abdul Aziz al-Dihlawi had copied that book word for word when he produced Al-Tuhfa al-Ithna Ashariyah. So the first thing that Mir Hamid Hussein does is he allocates a part of his rebuttal to this idea of plagiarism. Ya akhi, you want to go to war with the Shia faith? At least be honest when you engage in intellectual theft. At least if you're going to use someone else's argument, give credit to that person so we know who we're dealing with. Why does he realize that? How does he retrace those steps? Because he realizes that Abdul Aziz al-Dihlawi this is not his language, this is not his rhetoric. It's not his style. He doesn't write like this. And so immediately he discredits this individual. Then he comes to his arguments. He allocates 10 volumes to Hadithul Ghadir. 10 volumes. By the way, do you know the size of the actual book? Abaqatul Anwar. It hasn't been published in full, unfortunately, to this date. But if it were published, it would be 80 volumes in size. Ayatollah Sayyid Ali al-Milani, who's a scholar in the holy city of Qom, has summarized, abridged the book and translated into Arabic in 20 volumes. That's the summary version. 10 volumes to Hadith al-Ghadir. When it comes to Hadith al-Sakina, so Abdul Aziz al-Dihlawi, as we said, claims that there was no real, strong, authentic chain for this hadith. Mir Hamid Hussein, may Allah bless his soul and raise him with the Ahlul Bayt in paradise. He comes up with 95 different Sunni sources for Hadith al-Safina. 95. Again, 150 years ago. They say in his biography, they say that he made sure that when he was writing, he would only use tools, pens, inks that were made by Muslims. Even though British-made pens were much more superior, they were better. But he was this careful that if I'm going to defend my master Amir al-Mu'mineen, I want this to be pure. I want everything to be pure. So, 95 references for Hadith al-Safina. Abdul Aziz al-Dahlawi says that as for Hadith al-Thaqalain, that's also not an authentic hadith, because the authentic version of it says, إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّتِي. That's the actual hadith. If you ask any of the followers of the Sunnah of Khilafah to read out Hadith al-Thaqalain, they'll say Kitab Allah wa Sunnati. Even though this version of the hadith is only found in Muwatta Malik, and Malik, the narrator of Malik, says, بَلَغَنِي عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أَنَّهُ قَالَ. I heard someone say that the Prophet said such and such. But this is the brainwashing that's taken place. This is the systematic indoctrination. This is managed savagery on an intellectual level. Censorship and intellectual terrorism that's led to where we are today. So, he says that this hadith is not authentic. Mir Hamid Hussein does what he does best. He provides 150 authentic references for Hadith al-Thaqalain from their own sources. 150. Listen to this. Abdul Aziz Dahlawi says, there is a hadith that the Shia rely on called Hadith al-Tayr al-Mashwi. And it's the story when the Holy Prophet received a bird that was cooked and delivered from paradise. When this was brought to him, the Holy Prophet famously said, Allahumma ba'ath li ahabbul khalqi ilayk. Oh, Allah, send me the most beloved creation to you to come and join me on this blessed meal. Abdul Aziz Dahlawi, now obviously who shows up? None other than Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he comes and eats and feasts with the Holy Messenger of God. So, Abdul Aziz says, the authenticity of this hadith is not too bad. We can probably accept it. However, the Shia misunderstand the hadith. The Holy Prophet isn't saying, oh Allah, send me the most beloved creation to you in absolute terms. He's not saying the best of the best of all people. He's saying, I want the one who is best when it comes to eating with them. You know how sometimes you enjoy eating with some people, but not with other people? So who's the person who's gonna give me the right kind of appetite so that I could feast on this meal? And that person happened to be Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, Allahumma salli ala. You and I, if we wanted to respond to this, what would we say? We'd say, really? That's a cheap shot. That's pretty pathetic. Even for you. It's just ridiculous. Oh, even though the Holy Prophet is speaking in absolute terms, that you confine it in the idea that I want someone who is the best, most beloved to you, but only when in the area of food and eating and dining and so forth, right? As though he's some kind of food blogger. It's just ridiculous. It's pathetic. Have some shame, right? That's how we would respond, right? And it's a valid argument. You know what Mir Hamid Hussein Hindi does? He provides 70 different responses to this statement by Abdul Aziz al-Dahlawi. Not 1, not 2, not 10, not 20, but 70. You'd have to be a genius of the highest caliber for you to be able to respond to any argument with 70 different responses. They say that he died at the age of 60. Imagine, 60. In addition to this 80-volume magnum opus of his. He also had some 32 other titles that he wrote and compiled. How? How is it that they were so productive, so efficient? How is it that they were able to defend the truth in such a manner that boggles the mind? Part of it has to do with the fact that, brothers and sisters, number one, defending the truth, standing up for the rights of the Ahlul Bayt, paying the price isn't at the top of my list of priorities, is it? We're engaged and occupied with other things, little petty issues in our lives. Things about the acquisition of money, jobs, careers, work, going back and forth. Money is what makes the world run, isn't it? People are obsessed with money. They're obsessed with trying to acquire more and more riches. And if we're not doing that, we're doing something even worse, which is to squander the most precious asset that we have, our most important capital, our time, our lives, on social media, on things that don't advance our cause in this world nor in the next. Things that are completely useless, complete wastes of our time. Brothers and sisters, if we had a goal and this goal was noble enough to keep us up at night and wake us up early, if this goal was the loftiest and most noble of all, to be subjected to the prayer of Rasulullah, Allahumma ansur man nasarah, then we wouldn't squander our time on petty, useless, pathetic things. We would actually put an effort. We would do our best. We get bored too easily. Our attention spans have shrunk. We don't even read an article anymore. It's just the title. And so what needs to happen is a serious recalibration of our priorities. What needs to happen is for us to take some time out in solitude to actually think about what matters to me in this life. A beautiful hadith of Imam al-Kadhim, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. In which he says to Hisham ibn al-Hakam, he says to him, Ya Hisham, this great defender of the Ahlul Bayt, Ahlan binasirina, the Imam used to address him. Hisham asks the Imam for advice. It's a lengthy but incredibly insightful and beautiful hadith, part of which reads like this. The Imam says to him, Ya Hisham, inna al-mu'min nadhara ila dunya. A believer looked at this world, examined this life, and realized that the only way you can achieve anything meaningful in this world, meaning money and fame and so forth, the things that are meaningful in the context of this dunya, in order to achieve them, لا تنال إلا بالمشقة. That it's extremely difficult to do that. We all know it is difficult. Working and trying and running and going and so forth. It's not easy. The Imam says to him that a believer is a smart investor. A believer examines all of the opportunities, all the options presented to him, one of which is this dunya. In order to acquire anything of value in this world, you have to work hard. And in order to acquire anything of value in the next, you also have to work hard. The Imam says, so a believer is smart. He chose the difficult task that actually lasts. You see what the Imam is saying? It's difficult to work for this world and to achieve something of value. It's difficult to work for the hereafter. But which of these two is longer lasting? It's the afterlife. So let's focus on that. Let's invest there. Let's not squander our lives. As I said, we get bored so easily. A lot of people tell me, I can't read a book. I read one page and I doze off. You know what Mir Hamid Hussein Laknawi used to do? He would have had to read tens of thousands of books. In fact, when you read his book, there are references where he says, وَجَدْتُ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ بِالْحُدَيْدَ بِالْيَمَنِ. I found this book in Yemen. وَجَدْتُ هَذَا الْمَخْطُوط فِي مَكْتَبَةِ الْمَسْجِدِ النَّبَوِي فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. وَجَدْتُ هَذَا الْكِتَابِ فِي الْإِسْكِنْدَرِيَّةِ فِي مَصْرِ. Tens of thousands of manuscripts had to be read and examined for him to compile this book. How? Part of it was the use of his time efficiently. They say that he would be sitting down, reading, writing, researching. If he got too tired of that, he would then stand up, read, write, research. If he got too tired of that, he would then lie down on the right side, read, write, research. If he got too tired of it, he would lean on the left side, read, write, research. And if he got tired of all of that, he would lie on his back and put those giant manuscripts, those massive books that I don't know if you've seen them or not, he would place them over his chest and continue reading. Toward the end of his life, he became completely immobile. Some of his fingers didn't have sensation anymore. SubhanAllah. So what he did was he would place these manuscripts on his chest and he would read from them hours on end. Hours on end. His son says to Ayatollah al-Uzma Shahabuddin Mar'ashi Najafi, one of the Maraja who passed away in the holy city of Qom, he said to him that when we were preparing our father's body for burial, we noticed marks on his chest. Putting all those heavy books on him while he continued to read until his last breath. This is how hard they worked. This is how they struggled so that you and I would receive this heritage from our predecessors and these great giants and scholars. And you know, what gives motivation to such scholars, as I said, is this. And I apologize for the time that I've taken. These ulama who have blessed us tonight, my apologies to you all. But I want to mention this very important point. What motivated these scholars was the fact that, as I said earlier, they knew if they honored God's greatest vicegerents, that they would also be honored. But not in the way that we might think. Not by becoming rich or famous. Because as I said, Mir Hamid Hussein, may Allah bless his soul, he's not a famous scholar. Even though they say that Al-Ghadir, the famous work of Allam al-Amini, is actually based on Tabaqatul Anwar, right? But he's not that famous. As a matter of fact, he's buried in Lucknow. And you can Google his name. And you will see that his burial site is a very simple, worn out, old grave. Which is a shame, by the way. Because these people need to have shrines built over them. Just like Allam al-Majlisi, just like Shaykh al-Kulayni in Baghdad. They need to have shrines. People need to know who they were. They need to be reintroduced to these giants so that we could seek inspiration from them as well. So they're not looking for fame. They're not looking for any material possessions. Do you know what they're looking for? It is what we call ma'iyya. It is so they could be with the Ahlul Bayt. They could be included in those who are blessed by Amirul Mu'mineen, by Fatimatul Zahra. You've all heard that when Amirul Mu'mineen was about to wrap the shroud of his beloved sweetheart, his young wife Fatima, before he wrapped it, he called out, Ya Hassan, Ya Hussein, Ya Zainab, Ya Kulthum, Ya Fidda, تعالوا وتزودوا من أمكم فاطمة. Notice how the Imam includes Fidda with the children of Fatima al-Zahra. If you're a servant of Fatima, they look after you. They honor you. Sallallahu alayka ya awwala mazlum ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. Those last few days, Fatima al-Zahra was too weak. She was too tired. And so she was bedridden. Imagine a young mother surrounded by these young children. They can't even eat, seeing what their mother is suffering, how she's in this unimaginable pain. Imam al-Hassan saw what they did to his mother. He witnessed all of that. You know, there's no hadith that says that Imam al-Hassan was with his mother in that alleyway when they came and blocked her path back to her home. But we know because Lady Zainab was the narrator of the Fadakiyah sermon, It means that Fatima was surrounded by her children when they attacked her. Fatima, who was already injured from the ambush against her home. Fatima, who had already lost her unborn child. Fatima, who was already in pain when she walked out, having unmasked the hideous face of the Khilafah, and was handed the deed because they had no argument, they had no way of defending their actions. The second came to the first. He said to him, "How could you do this?" He said, "What else could I have done?" He said, "You do realize that this deed you have just given to Fatima is an admission of guilt for everything that she said about us in that sermon. It means that she was right. It means that we are after the restoration of Jahiliyyah. It means that we're trying to undo the Quran. It means that we are the leaders of hypocrisy. How could you do this?" He said, "What do we do?" He said, "I know what to do." He went outside. Imam al-Hasan was standing with his mother Fatima. Lady Zainab was there. Imam al-Hussein was there. So they knew what their mother was suffering from. And yet on this day, Fatima al-Zahra said to Asma that I want to do something different. I'd like to give my children a bath. I'd like to change their clothes, maybe comb their hair. Allahu Akbar. Fatima al-Zahra struggles, but she manages to do some of these things. The children then leave the house, perhaps to be with their father Amir al-Mu'mineen. Fatima al-Zahra then says to Asma, or one of her servants perhaps, he says to her that I'm going into a corner and I will attempt to take some rest. After a while, call for me. If I don't answer you, then you should know that I have passed from this world. Fatima al-Zahra goes there. Allahu Akbar. Ajarakallah ya sahib al-asri wal-zaman. She lies down. Asma, obviously, having heard Fatima telling her that I might leave this world today, she can't wait. And only a few moments pass. She calls out the name of her mistress Fatima. Ya bint Rasulullah. She doesn't hear a response. Ya al-Hasanain. She doesn't hear a response. She goes to where Fatima was lying on her bed. She notices that her right hand was over her face and she was no longer breathing. Why is her hand over her face? Because she doesn't want Amir al-Mu'mineen to see that mark. Even after her death, she's trying to shield the Imam from what happened to her behind the wall and the door. She puts the sheet over the face of Fatima al-Zahra. Allahu Akbar. Imam al-Hasan and Hussein come back to the house. They must have felt something. Asma, where is our mother? Asma panics. She doesn't know what to say. He says, your mother's sleeping. Imam al-Hasan says, Ma hadha waqtu nawmiha. This is not when my mother slept normally. Why would she go to sleep right now? Asma can't hold it in her any longer. Asma can only take patience from Hassan and Hussein, the grandchildren of Rasulullah. She immediately says to them, لَقَدْ مَاتَتْ أُمُّكُمْ فَاطِمَةٌ. I'm so sorry, your mother is dead. The first person to approach is Imam al-Hasan. He goes, he notices the sheets over her face. He removes it. Ummah kallimini. Mother, talk to me. She doesn't respond. He says, my brother Hussein, maybe she'll talk to you. Come to her. Imam al-Hussein goes to the other end. فَوَضَعَ خَدَّهُ عَلَى بَاطِنِ قَدَمِهَا. He placed his cheek over the bottom of her feet. Ummah kallimini. Speak to me, please, my mother. They realize the tragedy has struck. They understand that their mother is not anymore. The first thing they say is, Ummah, بلغي جدنا عنا سلامة. Oh mother, tell our grandfather that we said salam. They ran outside. They went straight to the masjid. They're crying when they enter the masjid. Some of the companions, I don't know what their motivation was. Are they trying to instill more pain into the hearts? Are they trying to offer condolences? I don't know. But as soon as they see these two young grandchildren of the Prophet crying, they say to them, did you see the mimbar of Rasulullah? And we're reminded by the Prophet, is that why you're crying? They say, أَوَلَيْسْ قَدْ مَاتَتْ أُمُّنَا فَاطِمَةٌ. No, our mother has been killed. Our mother has died. They say Amir al-Mu'mineen was standing on his 2 feet. The one who plucked open the gates of Khaybar fell right to his face. بأبي وأمي بمن العزاء يا بنت رسول الله. The Imam threw his turban to the ground. He got up and rushed back home. He entered the room. Ya ibnata Rasulillah, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah, answer me. Ya ibnata Sidratil Muntaha Ajibini. He mentions her titles and the titles of Rasulullah one after the other. She doesn't respond. For the first time, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Ya Fatima Ajibini, Fa'ana zawjuki Ali. Oh Fatima, this is Ali. I don't know how that broke the hearts of the angels, because they say that Fatima opened her eye. Then it was time for Fatima to be prepared for burial. I'll mention this and make dua for you, inshallah. This time the Imam calls them to come and bid their farewells. He's already finished the bathing, the shrouding, all of that has been finished. He calls their name one after the other. They come and they throw themselves on their young mother's body that is about to be buried. The call is made from the heavens. احملهما يا علي. Lift them up from their mother's body. فقد والله أبكيا ملائكة السماء. By God, they're making the angels cry. فحنت وأنت وأخرجت يدها من تحت الكفن. I say this, Ya Fatimah al-Zahra, when your children surrounded you, the angels cried. Amir al-Mu'mineen then gently removed them. But I wish you were there on the plains of Karbala, when the children of Aba Abdullah threw themselves on their father. Instead of being offered condolences, they whipped them, they lashed them. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. اللهم بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها، عجل اللهم لوليك الفرج والعافية والنصر. اجعلنا من أصحابه وأعوانه ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم وفقنا لمراضيك وجنبنا معاصيك. اللهم ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة الحسين وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين. اللهم وارحم موتانا خدمة أبي عبد الله الحسين من لا يذكرهم ذاكر، علماءنا شهداءنا، إلى أرواحهم جميعا ومن مضى من هذا الجمع. نهدي لهم ثواب المجلس وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.